Hi everyone. My goal with this entire series is to empower you to think better about politics and political issues and issues of life in general. So with this particular episode, I want to build on the previous episode I did on tradition and add a couple of things to it. So this is tradition part 2 and also the last part in that section. And what I want to add is 3 things. I want to argue for the relevance of tradition, I want to clarify a couple of things, and I want to briefly talk about what you can do about all that. So if you don't think you have used tradition to guide your political thinking on either side of the aisle, then think again, because you have. A couple of common examples where tradition comes into play when it comes to politics and political thinking are gender roles, religion, and abortion. And I will use gender roles to illustrate my general point, but I could have used any of the others. So what typically happens is, you look back on human history and you see that men and women used to fill different roles. The argument is general that women were supposed to be the providers of things inside the house or inside the homemakers, and men, of course, were supposed to be the providers. Now, of course, in our society today, you see that things have changed. If you look at it through the lens of tradition, you can say, wait a minute, there must have been a reason for doing things that way. There must be a good enough reason that women and men were assigned different roles. If you are a close-minded progressive, you can say, all of that is garbage, none of that matters. We have to be egalitarian and provide equal opportunity, which on some level I agree with. But what you do with the traditional part, which is our focus today, is you throw it out the window. What I argue is that neither is correct. What I think you should do is look at gender roles or any issue and understand why things were a certain way in the past and learn from that. Is there any reason why you would want to assign different roles to different members of the same couple? If there is, we can talk about that. If there's an advantage to be gained by one of them providing and the other one doing things around the house, then we can explore that. But don't do it just because that's how things were supposed to be in the past. So this is my second point. What I want to clarify is, what I am not arguing is that tradition is bad. That's not it. A lot of tradition I like. I like traditional food. I like traditional culture. I like a lot of things about tradition in general. What I am arguing is if you use tradition to guide the way you think about political issues, like the often made connection between religiosity and abortion. When you think you're a religious person, you definitely have, and that's not to say every religious person is like that, but a lot of institutional church pushes you to think about abortion a certain way. And the part of that is because in the past we didn't have abortion. It was not an option until relatively recently in human history. What I am arguing is that's not the way to think. The way to think is to explore the issue from all angles and to understand why things were a certain way. This is easy because contraception measures and abortion itself was not widely accessible. So in this regard, I say this part of tradition you should throw out the window. When it comes to the religious argument, that's a different conversation that should be had. My general point is don't use tradition to guide your political thinking. Instead, try to understand why certain traditions came to be and use that to inform your thinking. I'll give another example of Jewish culture in the past. So this has nothing to do with present day Jewish people or anything in the recent past. I'm talking about an older past. It's a well-known fact that Jewish communities had a lower mortality rate than others. And partially that was because of the hygiene imposed upon them by their religion. So, washing your hands on a regular basis is now commonly accepted practice, but in medieval Europe, a lot of communities didn't have this practice instituted, except for some Jewish communities. So in that case, if you were living at that time, you could say, our tradition is to wash our hands and it's good for us, and you would be right. So what I'm saying is neither accept that at face value, nor throw it out the window, but study it. And that's precisely what happened. At some point, other people also realized that it's a good idea to wash your hands on a regular basis because it kills a lot of the germs that could be harmful to you. And they started instituting it as a part of their daily routine to the point where there was no difference between Jewish and non-Jewish communities anymore. But that didn't happen because of the traditional aspect of it. It happened because our understanding of why it's a good idea to wash your hands, something so menial that we all take it for granted today, but until recently, relatively recently in human history, that was not the case. But now we know, right? So that's why we do it, not because it was tradition. In that case, tradition hit upon something important, something relevant, and something good. But what I'm saying is don't just accept it or deny it because it's tradition. What I'm saying is accept it by trying to understand the mechanisms behind it. So if we accept that tradition has played a role in the political thinking of each of us, and we agree that it's not a good idea absent the understanding of why certain traditions came to be, what can we do? I don't have a clear-cut answer for you, but what I do have starts with awareness. It always starts with awareness. And tradition is tricky, because in subsequent episodes I will talk about more visceral things like fear, very commonly used in politics to manipulate people in general, but even absent fear-mongering, fear is a very relevant subject that ties into a lot of what politics and political thinking is, even at an issue level. But that's a very strong negative emotion. Tradition is not that. It's a soft, warm, and fuzzy emotion in most cases, that, and also wrapped into the cognitive part of it. When you think about tradition, it's not so easy to spot. So it all starts with, whenever anybody argues, a politician or a religious leader, that you should do something because that's the way of our ancestors, train yourself to raise a red flag. If they don't have an argument for why a certain policy is good and they use tradition to support their view, red flag. If they do the opposite, and they say we have to go against tradition as we know it, red flag. So by training yourself to think this way, you can at least take the first step toward identifying when someone doesn't have a strong enough and sophisticated enough argument and they just try to use tradition, which happens more often than you think. If you think about a lot of political leaders, they will always tie it back to our culture and our values and our tradition, our time-honored traditions that you're supposed to respect. I say don't. And whenever someone says something like that, call them out and force them and yourself to dig deeper. Because the idea, as always, is to think deeper, think further, and ultimately think better.